Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're undertaking a seriously high-stakes investigation into one of the most opaque arenas in global trade. We're looking at the hidden financial footprints within the global aerospace and defense sector. We're talking about weapons, we're talking about money, and we're talking about the absolute urgent need for transparency. So we're going to look closely at the codified rules that are literally forcing these massive companies to bring their deepest vulnerabilities right into the light.
It's a pretty stark question, isn't it? What actually happens when billions of dollars in international defense contracts just operate in the shadows? Now, today, we aren't just looking at dry accounting rules. Instead, we're treating the newly updated SASB Sustainability Accounting Standards for Aerospace and Defense as our own declassified dossier. This framework acts like a giant magnifying glass, showing us exactly how anti-corruption, bribery prevention, and illicit trade compliance are measured and enforced on the world stage. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the business of defense.
So there's this fascinating geographic paradox that these companies face. Think about it. Aerospace and defense entities are usually headquartered in jurisdictions that have incredibly strong, robust business ethics laws. But they operate and sell their products globally, right? Which means they're frequently doing business in regions with incredibly weak government enforcement. And that creates the ultimate vulnerability. The standard actually identifies this precise gap as the absolute prime breeding ground for regulatory scrutiny and illicit activity.
And this is exactly why this matters to the bottom line, and honestly, to anyone watching this space. Because violating anti-bribery laws, it isn't just a moral failing or some minor legal hurdle. It is a massive financial wrecking ball. The source material is crystal clear here. Unethical practices directly jeopardize future revenue growth. They trigger huge legal costs and inflict severe reputational risk that can just instantly destroy a brand's value and lock a company entirely out of future market share. It's a risk so large, it absolutely has to be rigorously accounted for. Moving on to Section 2, tracking the cost of corruption. Let's follow the money. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact codified reporting standards that drag these practices out of the shadows. If you look under the business ethics section, there's a metric coded RTAE 510A.1. This is literally the financial footprint of illicit trade. It requires companies to disclose the total amount of monetary losses they've taken as a result of legal proceedings tied to corruption, bribery, or illicit international trade. Let's break down exactly what that metric forces companies to reveal, kind of like a checklist of financial damages. The standard dictates that these losses include all monetary liabilities paid to opposing parties. So we're talking civil judgments or settlements, regulatory penalties, things like disgorgement or restitution, and of course, criminal judgments and fines. But here's a really critical detail. It explicitly excludes legal and other fees incurred in the company's defense. Why? Well, because the standard wants to measure the actual penalty of the corruption itself, totally unclouded by how many millions the company spent on corporate lawyers trying to fight it. But here's the kicker. Just writing a check for a fine isn't enough anymore. The reporting standard goes much deeper. It forces companies to drag the whole context out into the public square. They have to describe the nature of the loss, like was it a guilty plea, a deferred prosecution agreement, and they must describe the context. For example, did you bribe a foreign official? Plus, they are required to detail the exact corrective actions they've implemented in response. Have they overhauled their management, changed business partners, deployed new technology? They have to show exactly what they are doing to fix the problem. All right, Section 3, geopolitical red flags. So we know the companies themselves have vulnerabilities, right? But how do we actually measure the risk of the geopolitical environments they're selling to? How do we quantify the danger of the map itself? To solve this, the framework relies on a highly respected external barometer, Transparency International's Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index. Specifically, the standard zeroes right in on countries ranked in the E band, which represents a very high risk of corruption, and the F band, which indicates an absolutely critical level of risk. So, the crucial point of exposure here is metric RT-AE 5110A.2. Under this really strict rule, a defense entity has to calculate and publicly disclose the exact amount of revenue it's generating from these specific E and F high-risk zones. This is brilliant because it acts as a giant spotlight on the most dangerous parts of a company's global revenue stream. It tells observers exactly how much of a company's financial lifeblood is being drawn from regions where illicit arms trade and bribery are practically the norm. It basically forces the company to publicly quantify their exposure to these massive geopolitical red flags. Which brings us to Section 4, securing the value chain, building that defensive shield. Look, in the defense industry, a company is honestly only as clean as its dirtiest subcontractor. The risk absolutely does not stop at the factory door. Metric RT AE 510A.3 requires a serious discussion of the processes used to manage business ethics risks not just internally, but throughout the entire value chain. And the standard explicitly defines this chain as including customers, suppliers, contractors, subcontractors, and joint venture partners. Because if even one link is compromised by bribery, the whole chain is poisoned. To manage this sprawling, massive network, companies have to deploy what's basically a global compliance arsenal. The framework encourages them to vet their partners using the heaviest hitters in global standards. We're talking principles from the Defense Industry Initiative, the ICC Rules Against Extortion, OECD Guidelines, Trace International, the UN Global Compact, and the World Economic Forum. This is quite literally the ultimate investigative toolkit for rigorous value chain compliance. But beyond those external frameworks, companies must build a fortress of internal due diligence too. The standard requires them to detail their everyday operational processes right from the ground up. Step 1, actually enforcing strict anti-corruption policies. Step 2, deploying comprehensive employee awareness programs so every single worker knows exactly what the red flags look like. Step 3, creating safe, effective internal mechanisms for reporting suspected violations. And Step 4, active participation in groups like the International Forum on Business Ethical Conduct. Let's move to our final verdict in Section 5. Compliance is operational excellence. It's really easy to think of operational excellence purely in terms of production, speed, and engineering efficiency, like who can build the fastest jet or the most advanced defense system. But if we put that right next to rigorous compliance, anti-corruption, transparency, and value chain vetting, a pretty stark reality emerges. Building the most advanced defense tech in the world means absolutely nothing if it's sold in the shadows, tainted by bribery, or lost to illicit international trade. True operational excellence requires both. To ground our entire investigation today in undeniable financial reality, we just need to look at this core summarizing thought straight from the SASB framework itself. Strong governance practices may mitigate the risk of violating business ethics laws and resulting regulatory penalties or brand value impacts. At the end of the day, ethics isn't just about doing the right thing. It is a fundamental mechanism for protecting the core value and the basic viability of the business itself. Which brings us to our final takeaway. We've seen the metrics, we've followed the money, and we've analyzed the geopolitical risks. Operational excellence really means nothing without a rigorous, value chain-wide compliance framework to manage corruption. So I'll leave you with this. As global citizens and stakeholders, how transparent is the defense value chain that secures the world you rely on? It's a question definitely worth asking, and thanks to these standards, it's a question we finally have the tools to answer. Thanks for learning with us on this explainer. Keep asking the tough questions.